Good morning, everyone. Dear participants, we'd like to warmly welcome you all to the second of 3 IMI SDG 6 country consultation webinars on SDG 6 gender contextualization. We're grateful for your presence. My name is Epifania Amu Adare. I'm Capacity Development Water and Gender Consultant for IMI SDG 6 Gender Contextualization Process and UNESCO World Water Assessment Program. I'll be your facilitator during this session. As you might already know, the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6 has developed methodological approaches and gender-relevant indicators for contextualizing and monitoring gender aspects related to the SDG 6 global indicators. These are in the form of an assessment framework, which has also been pilot tested by specific countries in order to assess the relevance and use of the framework. It is our pleasure to have you here with us today as we present the draft tools and results of the framework, as well as the experiences of pilot testing the framework in Brazil. We will also have an opportunity for Q&A after we listen to a recording from our colleagues from Brazil, as well as a chance to discuss as a group the potential for gender contextualization in your countries. We will start with a more official welcome and introduction by Mr. William Reedhead, who is the UN Water Coordinator of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6. So I'll pass you over to Will.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Just bear with me for a second while I share my screen. Are you seeing that now? Great. So it's fantastic to see so many people here today. I'm really pleased how things have progressed so far with the work that the Integrated Monitoring Initiative is doing on gender. And I'll just say a few words about IMI and about UN Water just before we kick off onto the main part of the webinar. So as you may or may not know, UN Water is a coordination mechanism coordinating the many UN agencies who are working in some way on water and sanitation. And right now there's more than 35 UN Water members of UN Water. We also bring together more than 40 international partners who are working on water and sanitation. And we are basically a coordination mechanism, which means that we try to find ways that we can find synergies and efficiencies on the work across the different UN agencies. One of the areas where it makes a lot of sense to combine our efforts is in monitoring and reporting. Because as you know, there are 11 global indicators under SDG 6, amongst 240, I think, indicators across all of the goals. And member states are expected to collect and report data on these indicators on a regular basis. So the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative was created to coordinate the work of these of 8 UN agencies who are the custodians for the 11 SDG 6 indicators. So that's the project that I'm coordinating. And this project it targets all member states. So we have interactions with every country in the world to explain the methodologies to them and help them with capacity, help build their capacity for monitoring and reporting those indicators. That in a nutshell is what we're doing in IMI. So here you can see a slide of these are the 11 global indicators, and on the right side you see the list of the custodian agencies. So those are the agencies who are responsible for each indicator. So they're responsible for the methodologies, they're responsible for the capacity building and for the global reporting. So IMI has been around since 2015, and we will be around for the entire length of the SDGs. And we are broken into 4 phases, as you can see here. And the purpose of IMI, you can see that. So it says by 2030, increased availability and holistic analysis of high quality data contributes to better informed water and sanitation policy, regulation, planning, and investment at all levels. So basically what we're about is trying to work with countries to get better data and to find ways to make the data useful for policy, decision-making, investments, and things like that at different levels. So that can be national level, it can be regional level, it can be global level. That's our purpose. We've completed the first two phases. So the first phase, which ran from 2015 to 2018, was to develop and test the methodologies for the indicators and to collect the first round of data. So that was the global baseline. So we had one data collection exercise in 2017 and 18. Then the second phase was more about building the capacity of countries to generate their own data, whereas the first data basically was just trying to access whatever was already available. The second phase was trying to increase what's available. So it was about building national ownership and building national capacity. So we did a lot of capacity building during this time, and we had a second data drive in 2020. And now we're in the third phase. It began at the beginning of this year, which is called Integrate and Mainstream. And this is about finding ways and building capacity on the use of data at different levels. So now that's bringing us a bit closer to the purpose. The purpose is about using the data for good policies and so on. So that's what the initiative is about. You can see here some of the results of the first two phases. So we engage in almost every single country of the world. We have focal points there, and we have overall focal points who coordinate the technical focal points in 134 countries. We've done lots of capacity building across the world, different sorts of things. During the pandemic, we shifted to much more online capacity building, which actually turned out to be more cost effective. We've engaged a smaller number of countries on strengthening institutional processes, because the integration part is really important at the country level, as water and sanitation can be split up between different ministries, which makes it difficult to have really comprehensive policies. And then as a result, you can see there in the chart, we've seen the reporting level go up from about 7 of the 12 possible indicators in 2019 up to 8.5 as of a couple of years ago. We'll see it go even higher this year when we're doing the third data drive. Yes, so I'll just move on. So that's looking backwards. That's what we've done in the first two phases. But now bringing us closer to what this webinar is about. So phase 3, which I mentioned, is about integration and mainstreaming. These are some of the additional areas of focus that we're going to be doing. So first of all, we'll be doing a data drive, doing one this year, and we'll do another one in 2026. The theme, the overall theme for this phase 3 is what we're calling data to policy. So that's what, as I mentioned, trying to get beyond just reporting the data into kind of some global processes, to actually talking about how these data can be useful for countries for different things. For that, as you can imagine, having a single value for each indicator for each country isn't terribly useful for making policies. It's useful for showing whether a country is, performing well or whether it's falling behind compared to other countries, but it's not a great policy tool. So we need to think about how we make these global indicators more useful at the country level for policy. And that brings us to disaggregation, which you know well, which means breaking down the measures either geographically or by different demographic groups. Or contextualization, which is not quite as well known, but that's different from disaggregation in that we can't just divide the different strata of the indicator, because our indicators don't do that very well for certain things. But contextualizing means looking at the global indicator through a lens of other issues, which allow us to interpret that indicator and make policies that are responsive to those other issues. And gender is a great example of that. It's not possible for most of our indicators to disaggregate them by gender because they're not measured in terms of populations. But we believe that we can look at complementary indicators which give additional insight to the global indicators about issues of gender. And that's what this webinar is about. And you can see some other things we're doing for phase 3. So we hope to have more sophisticated analysis once we have these higher resolution data sets. We're hoping to do more work about strengthening institutions and countries. And as part of that, we're going to be providing intensive support to small groups of focus countries. So that brings us now, I think, to the real meat of this webinar, is talking about the work that IMI has been doing so far on contextualizing gender for the SDG 6 global indicators. So with that, I will thank you. I'll stop talking and I'll give the floor back to Epi. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. So now, as Will said, I'll take you to the meat of the work by presenting on the IMI assessment framework, IMI SDG 6 assessment framework. Just 1 minute whilst I get the slide in order. You can all see the slides. Ah, good. Okay. So yeah, so as I said, I'll now provide a presentation on the rationale and design of the IMI SDG 6 assessment framework. I'll also touch a little bit on its content and the processes related to its development. So in sum, I'll be talking about the key aspects of the IMI SDG 6 work on gender contextualization of the SDG 6 global indicators. In order to begin this gender contextualization work, it was important that we understood the general context, namely the gender and water nexus. In that we had to comprehend the fact that gender and water are tightly linked simply because gender relations play an important role in determining different opportunities for women and men, as well as different vulnerabilities in their access and use of resources and knowledge. More specifically, women and girls are disproportionately affected by a lack of safe drinking water and sanitation and hygiene services. They are also disproportionately challenged in their ability to access and decide over water resources for productive uses. Additionally, the crucial role that gender plays in water resource and water use related aspects has only been partially reflected in institutional arrangements that are linked to the development and management of water resources. The reason for this may partially lie in the general lack of robust, consistent, sex disaggregated and gender sensitive water data, as well as in the paucity of related analysis that would help sustain the development of a gender baseline knowledge related to water. This then suggests a need for the bolstering of institutional arrangements with regards to gender and water concerns, so as to enable the contextualization of gender across various scales in the water and sanitation sector. When looking specifically at gender within the SDG 6, the overarching goal of SDG 6 is to ensure access to water and sanitation for all, including access to safe water, plus sanitation and hygiene as the most basic human need for health and well-being. In order to do so, there has to be an adoption of SDG 6 global indicators that are meaningful at both national and subnational levels for all different contexts and populations. But even more importantly, efforts to ensure that it is data from the field that drives policy, as you just heard Will talk about in relation to our focus. Additionally, the SDG 6 indicators should contribute to reducing the gender gap in water resource related and water use related social, economic, and environmental vulnerabilities. Thus recognizing that gender in terms of roles, responsibilities, dynamics, identity, etc., is also a stratifier of inequality. To date, however, gender as a stratifier of inequality within the SDG 6 is not well reflected. We see the potential for reflection of gender aspects within SDG 6 as being linked to the provision of complementary analysis or aggregation of the information provided by the SDG 6 indicators with other relevant data, plus the interpretive lines which are being formulated together using feedback from countries based on their experiences. So then the task is not about disaggregating each and every SDG 6 indicator by gender, but rather about crafting and overlaying complementary gender indicators that support countries in achieving their national policy objectives within the framework of water and sanitation, especially with regards to gender contextualization. The contextualization of existing SDG 6 data by gender and the development of additional gender-relevant indicators for use at the national or regional levels has been noted as both a challenge and an opportunity for a majority of the SDG 6 global indicators. We find that some indicators are easier to identify in terms of gender, e.g. indicators for WASH, while others are more difficult. So moving on, in ascertaining the relevance of gender contextualization within the SDG 6 global indicators, we would argue that capturing the gender and water cause-effect relations for each SDG 6 global indicator can help in 1, reducing gender inequalities, and 2, in promoting equal opportunities and benefits. This more specifically is about capturing the gender-sensitive drivers, pressures, and/or impacts on gender in relation to the different water and sanitation aspects. So in looking more specifically at the 11 SDG 6 global indicators with a gender lens, we see that, as you see with the first example, for SDGs 6.1 and 6.2 on WASH, they easily lend themselves to gender analysis, particularly to do with issues of women's access and ability to meet their WASH needs, women and girls' access to menstrual health, questions of gender differentiated affordability, and the realities of drinking water collection per gender group. SDG 6.42 as another example on water stress, it lends itself to complementary contextualization by gender when zooming into issues of accessibility to water and technology, for example, differentiated access to irrigation technology, but also to issues to do with water tenure rights and water permits as experienced per gender group. 6.51 as another example on integrated water resource management. This already considers the inclusion of gender in water resource management laws and plans. For example, by looking at participation in civil society to ascertain whether decision-making is gendered. There is, however, still the potential for developing the integrated water resource management gender inclusions further by examining specific enablers such as advocacy, high-level commitment, governance, human capital, financial resources, participation, monitoring, awareness, and education. For SDG 6A, which is on support to developing countries, this indicator lends itself to gender concerns when there is the inclusion of gender equality as a principal or significant objective within overseas development assistance. And then with 6B.1, which is on participation, there's the potential to cast a magnifying glass on women's representation through public participation in water and sanitation processes as their contribution to making decisions and/or managing directions, while also recognizing that participation is not just a question of having female bodies in the fold, it is also about ensuring and/or enabling their equitable access to power. And finally, with the SDG 6.3, 6.3.1, 6.3.2, and 6.6.1, which these are mostly environmental indicators, we see the potential for a meaningful contextualization by gender when analyzing the impacts under a gender lens, that is, impacts on health and safety, economic prosperity, and social well-being. Doing this raises questions such as how are impacts distributed, who is able to better adopt and why, and who bears the costs. This being in relation to inadequately treated wastewater treatment, so that would be 6.3.1, or poor water quality, 6.3.2, and deteriorating water-related ecosystems with 6.6.1. And additionally, when we look at the relevance of gender contextualization within the SDG 6 global indicators, there are overarching gender aspects to consider. 1, participation, 2, decision-making, and 3, impacts. And these aspects are themes that can be seen across multiple SDG 6 indicators. So here now I want to look a little bit at the gender contextualization of SDG 6 and the process that we went through. And the process was made up of several key IMI SDG 6 activities, which are as outlined in the slides. So in phase 2 of the IMI SDG 6 gender contextualization work, this heralded the development and dissemination of an inventory of existing tools and approaches for gender contextualization in relation to SDG 6. The inventory is comprised of, as I said, of a variety of tools. There are about 80 different products that have at various types and scales. And the tools were an attempt to contextualize gender aspects in water and sanitation management. For example, looking at issues of unequal access to resources, uneven distribution of benefits, opportunities, and responsibilities, etc. Through this exercise, it was found that the largest number of available tools, methods, frameworks, and indicators address the WASH sector, linking to SDGs 6.1 and 6.2. The next more readily available information was to do with the wider water resource management aspects, thus linking to SDG 6.4 and 6.5, with the remaining indicators being more challenging to address. After the inventory work, this was then followed by an internal assessment or review that was conducted by the IMI SDG 6 indicator working groups. The working groups review process involved a thorough investigation of gender representation in the current methodologies of each of the 11 global SDG 6 indicators. They also identified gaps and opportunities in contextualizing gender within the indicators, and thus outlined draft methodological approaches for gender disaggregation and/or contextualization of the SDG 6 indicators. A conceptual framework for gender contextualization was consequently developed to serve as complementary material that facilitated the work of the working groups. As an output of this activity, 11 reports and related summaries were produced, one per indicator. And these reports detailed the methodological approaches for examining the gender aspects in the SDG 6. Some overarching observations by the working groups, which were actually twofold, were one, that gender contextualization is relevant to SDG 6. Gender, water management, and water governance are causally linked, as gender relations play an important role in determining the possibility of accessing and using resources and knowledge, as well as participating in the decision-making processes. Gender also plays a role in determining the level of vulnerability and the nature of constraints people are facing. The second observation was that the methodologies for calculating each SDG 6 global indicator are very different, ranging from household survey-based data, field measurements, national accounting, and Earth observation-based calculations. This leads in turn to differences in the way gender can be contextualized for each indicator and for its feasibility. In addition, the working groups outlined draft methodological approaches for gender disaggregation and/or contextualization of the SDG 6 indicators. This work included the use of the conceptual framework, which I mentioned, which is a gender-inclusive drivers, pressure, state, impact, response framework that aims to capture the gender-water cause-effect relations for each indicator by capturing the gender-sensitive drivers, pressures, impacts, etc. After this, subsequently, a stakeholder and expert consultation workshop was conducted with 33 international gender experts to discuss and share perspectives on the feasibility of the different methodological approaches as outlined in the 11 reports. The findings of the workshop were synthesized into a workshop report. The experts covered a range of expertise across the global indicator themes, from wash, wastewater, water management, etc. And they were from organizations located in 20 different countries comprising national authorities, NGOs, international organizations, donors, and academia. A key result of this exercise was the development of the assessment framework with gender-relevant indicators, which was then to be pilot tested. Following the expert consultation, pilot testing of the approaches was launched in 3 pilot countries, so Brazil, Senegal, and Philippines, with further consideration of South Africa and the state of Palestine. To date, Brazil has completed the pilot, and you'll hear a little bit of their experiences later today, while Senegal's pilot testing is also well underway. The Philippines pilot is in early stages, followed by that of the state of Palestine. These pilot countries were selected to represent a range of capacities and contexts. And the objective of the pilots is to assess the feasibility of the proposed approaches for the support of the national and/or subnational policy needs of member states, as well as their efforts to internalize gender aspects in their water and sanitation management. The assessment framework was developed and made available to the pilot countries for this purpose. And as a consequence of its testing in Brazil and Senegal, the framework has since been revised based on recommendations. So next, with the development and adaptation of the tools, this is in terms of next steps. We're building on the expert consultation and the findings from the country pilots, and one or more guidance. So what out of that, one or more guidance notes or analytical briefs will be developed by the working groups, documenting the best practices for gender-sensitive and inclusive analysis and use of water and sanitation data. These documents will serve 2 purposes. One, to sensitize country governments on the importance of gender disaggregation and gender-sensitive interpretation of water and sanitation for specific global indicators. And 2, to be used as a user-friendly resource by member state technical experts as a complement to existing guidelines and tools supporting the rollout of the global indicators. Additionally, at this stage, phase 3, as was mentioned earlier by Will, IMI SDG 6 will proceed to implementation as part of the ongoing support provided to member states. A series of dissemination rollout and capacity building activities will be implemented in support of gender sensitive and inclusive analysis and the use of water and sanitation data at the country level. This phase will include identification of capacity building needs, designing training models and tools. And additionally, we would have, as we are having this right now, global webinars, but as well as regional webinars that will cover the entire contextualization framework, including contextualization for specific SDG 6 indicators. And there will also be country-specific support and technical assistance on stakeholder mapping, data mapping, analysis, etc., and potentially in-person global workshops with pilot countries and other focus countries. So just moving along a bit, the scope of the pilot testing in the member states is twofold. So first, it's technical, in that it's about assessing the feasibility of the working group's suggested methods to support national and subnational policy needs and the member states' efforts to internalize gender aspects in their water and sanitation management. Furthermore, to explore and co-develop together with the working groups a meaningful approach to contextualize gender within the SDG 6. And secondly, it's also an operational, in the sense that it's about investigating or identifying potential mechanisms and pathways that can be implemented in follow-up pilots for efficiently addressing the technical scope. And also in many ways to trial and learn from the pilot, the stepwise process that needs to be followed with stakeholders who need to be involved, and the kind of human resources needed, and additionally the type of stakeholder engagement, interaction, and related modalities. The assessment framework itself is comprised of a total of 109 gender-relevant indicators or metrics across all 11 global SDG 6 indicators. And these fall under 5 main policy objectives: 1, equal opportunity; 2, equal benefits; 3, shared responsibilities; 4, gender impartial impact alleviation, gender sensitive, and finally, gender sensitive enabling actions and measures. And I'll show an example a little later. The 109 indicators are assessed based on a common set of criteria, including 1, data availability and feasibility of collecting gender disaggregated data, 2, relevance and added value, and 3, representativeness and suitability. The indicators can be assessed either on a national scale or at a local scale. So for example, with a specific community, water body, river basin, etc. The idea at the end is to propose a short priority list of gender relevant indicators that are the most appropriate and feasible to capture gender related aspects and support relevant assessments. A pilot country can also choose to calculate some of the gender related indicators, either with existing data or by collecting the necessary data. And this assessment framework can be found on the website, the IMI SDG6 website. And we'll be sharing also later with them some surveys, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here, just to give a brief example, looking at the indicators, as you can see, the 5 objectives that I referred to earlier are at the top, so equal opportunities, equal benefits, shared responsibilities, and so on. So for example, for indicator 6.1 and 6.2, for equal opportunities, we have proportion of women and adolescent girls who were able to wash and change in privacy at home during their last menstrual period. And for example, again, with 6.1, 6.2, we have for the gender, sorry, I can't see the slides of it, sorry. Yeah, for the gender impartial impacts alleviation, we have time spent collecting drinking water. And if we look at another example, for 6.4.1 and 6.4.2, under shared responsibilities, you have percentage of household with women water carriers, or for example, for the gender sensitive enabling action measures for 6.5.1, you have SDG indicator 6.5.1, Q 2.2D, gender mainstreaming in water resources and management. So to conclude, further information on the gender contextualization effort can be found online at the, as I said, at the IMI SDG6 website. This includes the assessment framework, as described earlier, as well as an inventory of existing tools. Please take this right now as our invitation to you to engage with these resources, as well as an offer to contact us at the listed email address with your expressions of interest. And with that, I want to say thank you for your attention. So now, as we move along, we want to ask if you could spend a few moments to complete a short question poll. Yes. And with this, we want to ask your opinion on the value of an assessment framework such as the one that I just presented for the contextualization of gender in SDG 6. Note that your responses will be anonymous, so please be as candid as you can. So with this first poll question, we are asking for the contextualization of gender in SDG 6, and is an assessment framework such as the one presented, is it A, relevant, B, useful, C, essential, D, reliable, E, scalable, F, cost-effective, G, does not provide any added value? So if you have a few minutes just to answer that poll. So as you're asking for contextualization of gender in SDG 6, a framework such as the one presented is A, relevant, B, useful, C, essential, D, reliable, E, scalable, F, cost-effective, G, does not provide any added value. So at this point, we still have some, at this point, we'll just stop. Oh, we still have some answers. We'll just wait a few more minutes. So A, relevant, B, useful, C, essential, D, reliable, E, scalable, F, cost-effective, G, does not provide any added value. So stop the poll at this point. We have 58% answering this question. So based on these responses, the view is that for the contextualization of gender in SDG 6, an assessment framework such as the one presented is 50% say it is relevant, 50% believe it's useful, 24% believe it is essential, 15% believe it is reliable, 7% believe it's scalable, 2% believe it is cost effective, and 2% say it does not provide any value. So thanks for your responses. Okay. So as we close out the poll, next what we have is the pre-recorded presentation by Ms. Marcela Ayub Brazil, who is the water and sanitation specialist at the National Water and Sanitation Agency in Brazil. And in this video, Marcela will be presenting the experiences gained during the pilot testing of the assessment framework in Brazil, namely looking at one, the overall process they followed for identifying, analyzing, and monitoring gender aspects within the context of SDG 6. And also looking at the relevance and usefulness of the assessment framework, the key constraints and limitations they face, and the capacity development needs identified as a result. And we'll start the video recording now. I think there's something with the sound.
I'm working on it.
As we try and sort out the sound, perhaps what I can ask is that we have a second poll, and in the interest of time, we can perhaps do the second poll. Hmm.
Sorry,
So just a
I
minute.
can launch the video. Is that okay?
Yes, let's do
Okay,
that.
thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Hello, my name is Marcela Ayubi Brazil. I work at the National Water and Sanitation Agency of Brazil, which is called ANA, and I'm going to present the pre-pilot in Brazil for gender contextualization, promoting inclusive and gender-sensitive analysis related to water and sanitation. The gender contextualization of the SDG 6 is an IME SDG 6 activity. The IME is the Integrated Monitoring Initiative for SDG 6, and it tracks progresses towards the SDG 6. There are 11 global indicators which are monitored and reported by the member states. The IME engages with member states for capacity building and reporting on the 11 global indicators. Amongst its priority activities is the development of additional mechanisms for further disaggregation and contextualization of data. IME SDG 6 is currently examining the potential for a reflection of gender aspects within SDG 6 and the development of additional gender-relevant indicators for use at the national, local, or transboundary levels, the gender contextualization. The work plan of IME SDG 6 gender contextualization activities, they have the inventory of existing tools and approaches, the gender review by global indicator, development of methodological approaches, the stakeholder and expert consultation workshop, the pilot testing of methodologies and gender relevant indicators, the development and adaptation of tools, and the initial dissemination and implementation. And Brazil, together with other countries as Senegal, South Africa, and State of Palestine and Philippines, is one of the pilot testing countries for the project. The National Water and Sanitation Agency, ANA, is the water regulatory agency in Brazil. It implements the National Water Resources Policy, coordinates the National Water Resources Management System, the SINGRE, and establishes standards for the regulation of basic sanitation services. ANA is the focal point in Brazil for most of the SDG 6 indicators, and also the overall SDG 6 focal point. Other focal points that collaborate with ANA are the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Regional Development, the Brazilian Geological Survey, and the National Water Resources Council. The time series of indicators and analysis are presented in the report SDG 6 in Brazil, ANA's vision of the indicators. The second edition was released in 2022, also with a dashboard with the summary of the results. They can be accessed at this website. The overall process followed by Brazil was divided in two phases. 1. Public consultation through questionnaire at the National Meeting of Water Basin Committees, (NCOB), at August 2022, to get contributions and suggestions from SINGRE members in relation to the participation of women in the water resources management related to the SDG 651. And 2. The indicator analysis was based on consultation with the institutions responsible for relevant databases in Brazil, meetings, and analysis of the ANA technical group with the help of a Brazilian gender specialist. Here we have the methodological aspects of the Phase 1, the public consultation related to the SDG 651. We prepared a survey with a few questions, and we made a QR code available at the ANA stand at NCOB. We also spread by mailing, and after that we had 239 contributions, and we had the creation of graphics and a final revision and final considerations. Also, we had an editing for preparing a publication about the survey. This is one example of a question from the survey, which was ensuring representativeness in the National Water Resources Management System, the SINGRE, instances is one of the great challenges to the gender balance process. 24% of male said they fully agree, and 28% of female said they fully agree. Now, I brought here some comments from people who disagree and from people who agree. So, comments from people who disagree. Representation comes from the citizens' interest in participating. If there is no veto and any time of gender, it is already a great achievement. But I have nothing against inviting and encouraging the participation of anyone, as long as it is representative of one of the segments. And representations should be made through segments. Also a comment from one that agrees. The water resources agenda in Brazil is still an agenda that has predominantly male participation. There are ongoing changes, but there is still no balance of gender, diversity, and equity. Also from the survey, we had a question about what actions could be developed to enhance women's participation and influence in the management of water resources. The answers were divided into some macro axes, which were communication and dissemination, training and production of content and materials, holding events, need of financial resources, initiatives for articulating and obtaining data and research development, measures to encourage, dissemination of good practice and creation of networks, establishment or not of participation quotas, promotion actions, respect and safety. There were 201 answers from members of National Water Resources Council and its technical chamber, river basin committees, national and state bodies of water resources management, ministries, water basin executive agencies, and educational institutions. The survey resulted in a publication called SDG 6 and Gender, a UN Water Agenda, from the researcher Fernanda Matos, and it is available at this QR code. Here we have the methodological aspects of Phase 2, the analysis of the indicators. First, we made a conversion of the document for a single list at Word, and we made after that an understanding of each proposed item, because there were 119 indicators. Then we made a search of the databases, and we had a summary table of identified partner organizations for making contacts. We made a completion of documents, Word and Excel information received, and others. And finally, we made a revision and final considerations. Here we have a summary of identified organizations and indicators. Many of the indicators were related to the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, the IBGE. Also, we had other organizations that were identified as relevant. For example, the Ministry of Regional Development, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Labor, the ANA, and other associations and confederations, and the Embrapa, Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation. I'm going to start talking about the results of the indicator analysis. This is a summary of the indicator situation, and we had some duplicate indicators. We had indicators that had a huge research proximity. Some indicators required detailing and further investigation. This is because some indicators had different comprehensions from more than one institution that we contact. There were some indicators where we couldn't identify any organization to consult, and also we had no response for some indicators, and a lot of indicators with not available data, and also a few indicators with partially available data. These are the indicators with data available, and they are the gender indicators that we believe are most appropriate and feasible to capture gender aspects and support relevant assessments. The analysis was made based on data availability, relevance, representativeness, appropriateness, and feasibility. A few indicators were analyzed at the end of the work as feasible, and some examples are the proportion of the population using improved sanitation facilities that are not shared, the proportion of the population using improved water sources that are accessible on the premises, the percentage of irrigated farms managed by women, the percentage of area equipped for irrigation managed by women, the percentage of participation of women in extension services, the gender parity within water management decision-making bodies or management institutions, and the level of participation of women in planning programs by sector, considering urban sanitation, rural sanitation, urban drinking water supply, rural drinking water supply, hand hygiene, and water resources planning and management. So we had some different final assessments made by the different institutions that were contacted. For example, for the sanitation indicators, the IBGE made an assessment that the relevance was general for the population as a whole, not so much by gender. But we, the ANA technical team and the consultant, we believe this data by gender is relevant, considering the access to water and sanitation services. So we made a final assessment together with the gender specialist after the answers from the institutions. Also, we have a list of the gender indicators that we believe are interesting, they have high feasibility, but they require more data, detailing, or investigation. Some examples are menstrual hygiene, safety, and privacy. During your last menstrual period, were you able to wash and change in privacy at home? and the proportion of population used improved water sources not exceeding 30 minutes of collection time. The percentage of the population affected by the lack of treatment of wastewater. The percentage of households with frequent interruptions in water supplies and perceptions of their cascading impacts on female and male. And also the transboundary water management indicators. One of the final results of the pilot was to see that we have few information about the transboundary water management segregated by gender, and they are very important. There were some constraints and limitations during the pilot exercise in Brazil. We faced difficulties in obtaining responses from government institutions during the development of the work for the following reasons: the calendar of the 2022 FIFA World Cup, the festivities during the month of December, the holding of elections for president, governors, and members of the National Congress and Senate, the governmental transitions that have taken place. Therefore, it would be very interesting to continue the gender contextualization research with more feedback and interaction with the relevant database institutions. After concluding the pilot exercise in Brazil, we have some suggestions and conclusions that are to reduce the number of indicators to be investigated, to simplify questions that proved challenging for respondents, to expand the definition of the terms used and the description of what is expected or considered in the indicator. This is because there were some different responses to the same indicator depending on the understanding by the institutions. And to consider excluding very broad questions. Finally, we suggest that the UN Water continues to encourage this type of work with countries, providing more information and examples of the global relevance of gender contextualization in SDG 6. It seems that this is not so clear for some institutions in Brazil. It was a very fruitful experience for Brazil to participate in this pilot of gender contextualization, and we realized that we need to make a lot of progress on this topic. On the other hand, it was very nice to see that some indicators are feasible and they can be calculated and they are interesting, and some the institutions that we made contact during the work were very interested in carrying out. And we know that women play a fundamental role in the use of and management of water, being the main users in various activities, such as internal consumption, subsistence agriculture, health, and sanitation. Furthermore, they often also assume important responsibilities in the education of children, in family health, and in the care of the sick. So, it is crucial that the role of women as providers and users of water resources and guardians of the environment is reflected in institutional arrangements for the development and management of water resources. Thank you. I would like to especially thank the UN Water for this opportunity, and feel free to contact me if you have any doubts. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks to Marcela remotely for that presentation on the Brazil pilot. Before we move forward into the Q&A and the discussion session, we have a second poll that we'd like to share with you. Again, as mentioned earlier, the polls are anonymous. And with this poll, we just wanted to get a sense from you about whether or not you think you can easily identify gender expertise within your countries. So the question is there easily identifiable gender expertise available within the water and sanitation authorities, bodies, and/or institutions in your countries? Yes, if it's yes, who are these? Is it gender experts, gender units, gender institutions, literature on gender, frameworks, tools, and methodologies, or is it a no? So is it easy to identify expertise in your country? If it's yes, is it experts, units, institutions, literature, frameworks, tools, methodologies, or is it a no? So if you can give us some of your thoughts on this question about gender expertise in your country. If it's a yes, experts, units, institutions, literature, frameworks, tools, methodology, or is it a no? We'll just give it a few more minutes. Well, not minutes, seconds. Okay, so it looks like the poll is coming to close, so we'll just stop the poll and look at the responses that we have. So from about half of you, yes, there is, or it's easy to identify expertise in your country. In terms of its experts, so gender expert, 30% say they have experts, 27% have units, 32% have institutions, 8% can find literature on it, and frameworks and tools methodology, 27%, but also for 27%, it's not easily identifiable. Thanks for these responses. I'll stop sharing the poll. And looking at the time, what I think might be useful is with the Q&A and discussion sessions to roll them in together. But if you have any questions that you want to ask about the presentations on the assessment framework and also with Brazil, do raise your hand. But otherwise, let me share our first question for the discussion. Just bear with me 1 minute. So I see we have a hand raise. I see we have a hand raise from Bisan Shona. If we can, yes, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the invite. This was very interesting. Actually, I would like to have a copy of the Brazilian presentation. As we are next online, the project or the pilot project could start in Palestine early in December. So I think it's very interesting what our Brazilian colleagues did, utilizing their experience with much fasten the process in Palestine, and we could have some lessons learned from their experience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. So looking at our first question, how can we make the IMI SDG 6 gender contextualization more relevant and useful for countries to incorporate gender issues into water and sanitation policy development? Any thoughts on this question? Does anybody have any ideas? I'll give our second question as well. What are some innovative solutions to overcome the constraints and limitations identified by the pilot country, such as lack of awareness, advocacy, high-level commitment, coordination mechanisms, human resources, technical knowledge skills, gender disaggregated data, and/or funding? How can these solutions be scaled up and replicated in other countries? I see. Is it Mr. Adamson? Can we unmute Mr. Adamson?
All right, thank you. I've just heard a lot of presentations, and I think what is required to be done, especially in ensuring that gender issues are managed well, especially in countries like, the sub-Saharan countries, especially because we have the high rate of this gender imbalance. I think one among the things that are to be done is to make sure that more trainings are available and exchange of experiences. For instance, if I am working from one among the Tanzanian water supply and sanitation authorities, so if I could have an opportunity to experience maybe what is done in Brazil, for instance, or what is done in another country. So it can be that practical experiences for the gender champions and other people who deals direct with the management of gender issues. I think we need more experience sharing, and we need more insemination. I mean, to be educated on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else? I think I saw earlier Mrs. Shona's hand up again. No. I believe we also have our colleagues from South Africa with us today. Mrs. Petunia Ramaneniwa. Do you have any comments to share with us? Yes, if you can unmute Mrs. Ramaneniwa.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. I think for the first question, the previous speaker has already addressed the issue of lesson sharing, which is very important. And I think also for me, the issue of ensuring that people on the ground are able to, we are more inclusive in terms of the work that we do with them. But what also comes out is, as these reports are then to be implemented, we also need to bring in a stronger monitoring and reporting and evaluation process, which is then implemented, and everyone is involved. I think also public awareness, I saw in the presentation that was made by Brazil, the issue around communication. For me, that is also very critical to have more public awareness. But I think also the last point for me is around how we get more gender experts within the water sector to be involved, and we utilize them effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just check a chat. I believe we have some questions in the chat. Okay. By nationalizing the gender concept so that we can guarantee that all aspects under SDG 6 are covered and no one is, okay, sorry. So in answer to the first question, how can we make IMI SDG 6 gender contextualization more relevant and useful? We have a response from Mrs. Shona saying by nationalizing the gender concept so that we can guarantee that all aspects under SDG 6 are covered and no one is left behind. And also 2, cooperating and cross-cutting with national policy agenda in addition to related sectorial strategies. Thanks for those responses. I believe the questions seem to, I'll put them back up. Because we have a third question, third and final question. Just bear with me 1 minute. Yes, so our third and final question, what are some key capacity development needs at the national and/or subnational level to identify, analyze, and monitor gender aspects in water-related policy, planning, and procedures? How can these capacity development needs be addressed through training, education, mentorship, and other forms of support? So really, this is a question that we would definitely want to hear from you on. I see Mrs. Ramanuniwa, you have your hand raised. Yes, the floor is yours. Hello.
All right, thank you. I was muted. I've been trying to unmute myself. My apologies for that. And once more, good afternoon. Okay, I need to. From my side, I think what is more important is the first one is around mentorship. We need to look at how those gender experts can mentor the others so that we've got a bigger pool of people who would contribute to the contextualization of gender within the SDG. Then there's an element around fundraising or sourcing of funding, which needs to be enhanced, and looking at how that can assist from a capacity building perspective, from an implementation perspective, but also moving forward with the outcomes of this study, how we then implement that. And then there's also what is referred to as systematic capacity building, where we need to look at getting the support from the political leadership. That is very, very important. And with that, we will then be able to align to the policy strategies of government and cascade it down. There's also issues around strategic partnership with the private sector, the civil society organization or community-based organization, and government. We just need to work, find how best those, from a civil society, community-based organization to private sector, how and government, how best we then support each other and ensure that we enhance the capacity building on that. And then the last one would be for me with those having solid agreements that would ensure that everyone is commits to the mandates that they are responsible for, and then also will be able to report so that we can then consolidate and have a country report. Yeah, and that will be my input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see we have another hand up, so Mrs. Shona, but I'll just read a comment that was in the chat and then hand the floor to you. So the comment in the chat said, Sudan is a country blessed by God with surface and groundwater that lacks integrated management of water resources. And now the floor is yours, Mrs. Shona.
As for the second question, I think the constraints or limitation related to the piloting could be avoided or overcome through spreading awareness through water sector groups, water and sanitation sector groups, using initiatives like wash and glass surveys, so people can collect more data and take the initiative for a further step, scaled up towards the achievement of the objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So are there any other comments before we move on as we're drawing to the close? Okay. So if what I'll do now is move on then to the next point, which is an important point, which is also gives, sorry, 1 minute, but which also would help us in, just 1 minute, sorry. Just trying to get to the next slide. For some reason, it won't open that way. Yes, but this, yes, it. So the next, sorry, hold on a minute. I think we had a hand up. Yes, Ms. Kigaya. If you can please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Mary. So I want to contribute towards the efforts that we can do or in terms of capacity building to address the gaps. We need to create awareness on gender to our readers and policymakers so that there is need from such studies, awareness, so that there is need to incorporate the gender issues in water and sanitation in the policies that the country would be making, so that even as we do our projects from the word go, at every project phase, we are able to have information or data that is gender disintegrated, so that at the end of the project, after we've finalized our programs and projects, it will be now easy to monitor the issues of gender in terms of planning, in terms of implementation, the impacts and the results. And also when we do the awareness creations, it will be easier for the readers to dedicate some budgets towards gender in water and sanitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important points. Thank you. And thinking of these points moving forward, we really do want your opinion. And as a consequence of that, after the webinar, in about a week or two, we will be sending an email that would have 2 surveys. The first survey, the review survey on the assessment framework tools. And then the second is a feedback survey on capacity development needs. Now, with the first survey, really as a continuation from this webinar, what we would like in the first survey is our expression of interest in receiving further feedback from you on the assessment framework, the tools developed thus far, most especially the relevance and use of the indicators provided in the framework. And as you heard mentioned, from Brazil, there were 119 at the moment, now there are 109. So we do take the feedback on board as we try to finalize this framework. And we're asking you really, in relationship to that, if possible, to make a selection of the most relevant indicators to your context. Now, with this survey, we also seek to understand the level of gender mainstreaming in policy in your context, as well as whether or not gender aspects are taken into account within the water and sanitation sector, namely through SDG 6. We also want to identify the key constraints and limitations that impede the mainstreaming of gender-sensitive and inclusive analysis within water policy development at either local or national levels. In addition to sharing this survey, then there will also be a link to the current assessment framework in 4 languages, so in Arabic, French, Spanish, and English. And then with the second survey, this is a feedback survey on capacity development needs. This survey is a bit to gain a better understanding of the national capacity development needs in your context. The survey contains some general questions about the inclusion of gender analysis in water and sanitation policy development in your country. And it also includes specific questions related to specific capacity development needs for enhancing the identification of gender aspects in the water and sanitation sector. And this in particular, their analysis, their monitoring, and their integration into policy, and their contextualization within the SDG 6. So we'd then ask that each of the surveys be completed within a 4-week window for when they're received by you. And we also understand that the responses to the surveys may sometimes reflect a more personal versus institutional views or knowledge. This is okay because for us, it's extremely valuable information for the progression of the IMI SDG 6 effort towards the drafting and finalization of a capacity development strategy. And just with that, I want to ask, are there any more questions before we move to the closing remarks by Mr. Reidhead? If not, I would say at this stage, I'll stop sharing this. I'll say thanks to all of you for really participation and for the discussion thus far. We're at the end of these proceedings. I'll hand to Will, but we really wish for this conversation to continue beyond today.
Great, thanks, Epi. Yes, first, yeah, a great thanks to everyone for joining us today. It was quite a good turnout. I'm very pleased. Thanks to Epifania for all of your facilitation and moderation, and thanks to the Brazilian team, although they weren't here with us physically, but for a very good presentation. And also great to have Palestine and South Africa contributing so much, because these are countries that we've been engaging with closely. Just quickly, I saw there was one question that I wanted to speak to from Henry from Australia. So if you don't mind a little bit of self-promotion, as far as I know, IMI is the only initiative in the UN system that's putting real attention on improving monitoring and reporting for any of the SDGs. All the custodians for all the indicators, all 240 indicators, are doing their job, and they're doing a good job. But we are, I think, the only project where we've actually brought together, and in our case, there's 8 different custodian agencies to work so comprehensively with countries. So when you're asking questions about what are other goals doing, first of all, I don't know, I do not know offhand. I'd like to think that maybe some others are emulating some of what we're doing, but it's probably not as comprehensive as what we're doing. So the custodian, so you're asking about SDG 5, which is the gender goal. I do know that they've got some pretty good data coming in, but I don't know exactly what they're doing to support countries in that. UN Women is, I believe, the custodian for all of the gender indicators. So they're probably the best place to follow up with them. So just another point I wanted to highlight. I think Epi made the point quite well. This is a framework. I mean, there's still 109 gender indicators in it, which maybe will become fewer as we finish the pilots. But just be clear, this is not additional reporting. So countries are expected from the UN system to provide data on the global indicators periodically, but these are not the global indicators. These are additional complementary gender measures that contextualize the global indicator. This is for you. No one should ever be asking you to send the data to New York or to Geneva, or it's not for that. This is basically recognizing, and this is coming back to what I said before, about data to policy. To make the global indicators useful for national or subnational level policy, we need extra tools. And these gender contextualization tools are an example of that. So this is a framework that's meant to help countries figure out how to talk to their policymakers about water and sanitation to improve the status of gender. This is for you. This is not for us. There's something that's really important to highlight, because sometimes people think, oh my gosh, UN water, we're, 11 indicators is bad enough. Now here's another 100 we have to report. No way. No, it's not about that. It's really about a tool for you to use. But that also highlights the challenges that we face, because in IMI, we spent the first 7 years focusing only on the 11 global indicators and addressing all the different technical, monitoring challenges we have about those indicators. It's not easy to monitor ambient water quality. It requires lots of infrastructure, requires certain skills, et cetera, et cetera. We've been focusing on that for the first 7 years. And also we've been focusing on the institutional side of things, about how to get monitoring recognized by the country governments, and also how to get data used for policy, because for a long time, there wasn't good enough data. So policies were made without having a rich, database, source of data. They were made in a vacuum, in a sense. So we've been focusing on that for 7 years. But now with this gender work, it's a whole new level, because we're talking about not just additional sources of data, which might require collecting in the country. Just the technical challenge has gotten that much greater. But we're talking about a sector that has not historically been integrated with water and sanitation. You saw the second poll. How many of your countries actually have gender institutions that are linked to water and sanitation? It's a minority. So we're facing, in addition to more technical challenges on these new indicators, we're facing additional institutional challenges on how to integrate gender people with water people. So that's all to say that the next steps of what we're doing, once we finalize this framework, we are really going to focus on the capacity building. And the institutional side of it is as important as the technical side of it. So I saw that there was a question, I think it came from Angola, about how can rollout be done in their country. So we don't know yet. We're going to be coming up with a strategy for how we build capacity, what we offer. Hopefully we'll find some good measures for capacity, but keep an eye on that. And that's what the questionnaires are for. So the 2 surveys that Epi just told you about, we're still collecting information on the framework itself, and we want information on what your capacity needs are. So, all that is to say that, if you have the time, it might be a couple of hours of your time. Be great if you fill out those surveys, and then we can have UN Water and the Integrated Monitoring Initiative can have a really well-informed capacity building strategy for the years to come. And that's really all I want to say. My time is up. So from my side, from Geneva, I want to thank all of you for being here with us. Hope you have a great rest of your day. And I want to hand the floor back to Epi to close the webinar.
Thanks, Will. So really, yes, as Will said, we really want to thank you for spending your precious time with us today. And we hope to hear from you in relationship to what we've presented, the framework and the capacity development needs in your country. And also want to thank our colleagues in the background who have been helping us to be able to present to you and have this discussion. And really have a good day. So thank you. Thank you and bye.